Almost every community member I speak with about this community's challenges names affordable housing as one of the biggest. We've done several episodes on the topic of affordable housing, and we'll link those in the show notes for you. Today, we will get detailed about the economics, policies, and on-the-ground conditions that make it possible for us to create housing that's attainable for people at all income levels. I'm Katie Smith with Greater Good Greenville, and on this episode of Simple Civics, Greenville County, I speak with folks from the Greenville Housing Fund, Bryan Brown, President and CEO, and Amber Stewart, Advocacy and Engagement Director. They will note that more than 80%, the vast majority of Greenville County's residents, make less than our area's median income, meaning that there is a severe lack of places in our community they can afford. But they'll point out ways that elected officials, government staff, the private sector, nonprofits, and you listeners can be part of the solution to our housing shortage. You can learn more about Greenville Housing Fund in our link in the show notes. Well, I'm so pleased to be joined by Amber Stewart and Bryan Brown with the Greenville Housing Fund here to talk about a really important topic. And just from their name, I'm sure listeners know they have a big job, and we're really grateful to them for doing it.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about affordable housing. It creates a picture of a place or a particular building in the minds of many, but it's really a relative term. So I'd love for you all to start by defining what is affordable housing.
Well, I always like to start by reminding folks that everyone lives in affordable housing because they live in housing that's affordable to them. And so what we really mean by the term, I like to say housing affordability. So housing that is affordable to the person we're talking about is that you should be spending no more than 30% of your monthly income towards your housing. If you are spending more than 30% of your monthly income towards your housing, we consider you housing insecure. And if you spend more than 50% of your monthly income towards your housing, we consider you severely cost burdened. And unfortunately, we have a sizable number of community members who are paying 50% or more of their monthly income towards their housing, primarily because we live in a high cost and growing housing market.
It's such a great point because you imagine that all of us want to be able to afford our housing, but some are CEOs of a large company that might have a large 6-figure or 7-figure budget, but there is still something that is 30% for that people, just like there is for someone making minimum wage. So 30% is a relative term, but an important one. So what does that look like for the average individual?
Yeah, so we know Greenville County is growing. We have over 500,000 people in our county, and the majority of our workforce falls under that, what we call 80% area median income, or AMI. So here in Greenville County, to be at the average 100% AMI for a family of four, you're having a yearly income of $89,000. So what does that look like? When we actually break that down of who makes 100% AMI or below, the majority of our workforce is in about the 50 to 60% AMI range. Over 60% of our workforce. So that's the majority of who is living and working in Greenville County. So those are our healthcare individuals, people working in manufacturing, sales, food service, office administration. That's what makes our county thriving because we want to be able to drive downtown and access the wonderful restaurants and amenities. We want to be able to go to the fun sports arenas and concerts and shows, and we want to be able to go out into the wonderful parks and stuff that are offered. And so to actually paint a picture what that looks like from a safety measure is our firefighters who are making sure they're responding to our community needs. The starting yearly salary for a firefighter here in Greenville County is $48,000 a year. And so if you're making $48,000 and we're going off of the definition that Bryan shared of we should only be spending 30% of our income on housing, an individual who's a starter firefighter, they should only max be renting $1,200 a month on a rental property. but our current average rent in Greenville County is $1,400. And so that it just makes it challenging to have choices and finding that affordability based on your income.
And to compound that, you mentioned, we have this growing community, right? And people are moving here because it's such a nice place to live. And so what's happening in the context of what Amber just described is as folks move in with higher incomes, they are consuming housing that's more affordable than what they could really. So if I can afford, $3,000 a month, but I'm living in a place for $1,500, I am occupying a place that somebody else can no longer access. And that is pushing down on the housing market. And so just everything that Amber just described, those are, really folks who are solidly in our workforce. But think about those folks who are in lower wage jobs. And so as the consumption of housing is occurring in our community, folks with fewer means are really getting more priced out. And so as we look across the housing ecosystem, there is a continuum of housing that we talk about, and it goes from unsheltered homeless to market rate home ownership. And there's a broad continuum. And through our life cycle, people move up and down that continuum. Think about, hey, I've lived in my house my whole life. I raised my family. I'm retired. Now I'm on a fixed income. Maybe my property taxes are going up. Maybe my maintenance costs are going up. I've got repairs and I can no longer afford it. And so people, kind of get into a position where they're forced to sell. Same thing if they're, living in a rental or in a condo where the fees go up and they lose their spouse, they're widowed. All of a sudden now it's like, I can't afford to live here anymore. I have to move to something more affordable. And that happens every day across our community. And so I think the reason that's important for people to think about is, it's a dynamic market, including a housing market, and that people's circumstances change. They get married, they have kids, they were in a 1 or 2 bedroom, now they need a 3 bedroom, so on and so forth. And so I want people to really think about how dynamic the market is. And when we talk about housing, people are moving in and up and down as things change. And, we have a growing population of older people. So all across America, it's called, it's referred to sometimes as a silver tsunami. Think about the aging population and what that means for our housing needs and what they can spend. I believe that our senior population is the most vulnerable population in the community because they're on a fixed income. They're very constrained in what they can afford, and their options are becoming more limited as our population grows and housing is consumed by younger people.
Thank you for painting that picture, because I do think when you think of affordable housing, you think we need to build a new thing. And yes, that is a part of it, but how dynamic, as you said, the housing market is. I think about I'm someone in my mid-50s, so have someone recently out of college, and I'm seeing kids graduate from college and want to move back to their hometown and need an apartment. And that is what someone who, as you described, is retired, they might also want an apartment. And then you have people moving here from much wealthier housing markets like California or New York who find our apartments to be a bargain. And all those people are now seeking that same affordable unit. So it's a big challenge that we have and that you really have at Greenville Housing Fund.
It is. And people who've lived here for any length of time, or especially people who are from our community, they're seeing the market as, cost escalating. But your point's a really good one. People outside our market, they're looking at this like, wow, this is a bargain.
Right. That's what I'm always so astonished by.
Right. And so that's kind of what we're up against. We're in a market right now where interest rates are high, construction costs are going up. Whether or not we have tariffs could impact the price of materials, just the cost of wood, aluminum. Just think about typical building materials, windows, and what goes into that. If those costs are going up, it's just making housing harder. And so our role at the Greenville Housing Fund is to really work across the housing ecosystem with our partners. We have an affordable housing coalition that Amber staffs, public and private organizations. The private sector is a big piece of our housing market, but we also have nonprofit partners, we have government partners, and we need all of those partners to work together to really create a healthy housing market that is attainable for everyone.
With all the partnerships at all the levels that Bryan mentioned, that's so important for the public-private partnerships. I think a lot of times people, when they hear affordable housing, they think it's cheaper quality housing, but to build housing at a rate that is attainable for individuals, it costs the same as much as any other market rate housing. And the difference is the funding behind it, because at a market rate, whatever costs go into building that, that just gets pushed off to the end user, is paying for it, if it's the home sale price or the rent price. And so that gets is what gets passed off. But when it comes to affordable, you need it to be subsidized. And so that's why we rely on partnerships at all level to help reduce those costs, because to make affordable housing happen, like there are usually 5, 6 plus funding sources to make it. And so that's why we, with private donations, private investments that people make to great organizations across the county, and then relying on whatever those public dollars are or incentives to encourage affordable housing, make it more feasible to reduce those costs so that they can charge a lower home sale price or rental price so that individuals can access it and have the attainability to that housing.
Amber's making such a great point. So when we construct or build housing, it costs what it costs. And civics, since that's what we're talking about, I think it's really important to remind people that in our state, affordable housing is a public purpose. And the reason it's a public purpose is we need attainable housing to maintain a healthy and vibrant community.
Well, given how popular Greenville County is for people to move to, and really all of South Carolina, and that means housing's in high demand, what tools are available to those different parties that you mentioned, Bryan, to government, private entities, and individuals, nonprofits, to make more affordable housing available?
Great question. So there's the cost of land. So maybe we have either cheaper land or free land. Time is money. So maybe we can streamline our approval process on land regulations and the development, complying with the development ordinances to speed things up. That saves money. So housing is highly regulated. So when you think about the cost of new housing and why is it going up, the National Home Builders Association put out a report recently that described the regulatory cost of new construction in the single-family market and the multifamily market. And in the multifamily market, 40% of the cost of multifamily construction is regulatory. It's also 22 to 25% for the cost of single-family construction. Maybe we can subsidize some capital sourcing through the tax credit program, Community Reinvestment Act sources through our lending partners. Those are some tools to make the development and the sources of capital to build a project cost less. But at the end of the day, it's going to cost what it costs, and then the developer is going to rely on the revenue generated by the project to meet not only the debt service on the project, but the ongoing operating expenses, the cost of insurance, and paying the tax bill. And so one of the tools, another local tool that we have control over, is how we assess and charge property taxes in our community. And in Greenville County, we actually have an affordable housing incentive policy that uses the property tax as a way to incentivize the inclusion of a component of affordable housing in an otherwise market rate transaction. Right now, what we've been talking about is how do you construct a housing and how do you make it more affordable and more attainable to the end user? And so if we have a market rate development and we want to make 20% of those units, so if there's 100 units and we want 20 of them to be more affordable and it's a private transaction, the best way to do that is by reducing the property tax bill. And what a lot of people in Greenville and in South Carolina don't know, because it's not on the forefront of everybody's mind, is our property tax system in the state is structured in a way that's not equal for everyone. So if you live in a home that you own, you are taxed at a much lower rate than commercial and multifamily properties are. There's a 4% tax rate for homeowners and a 6% tax rate for commercial property. And that's because the way we pay for public education in the state of South Carolina is really carried by commercial property owners. That burden does not rest on homeowners in our state. And so multifamily falls under that commercial rate. We have a very expensive tax environment in the state of South Carolina for apartment communities. And I don't know that most people know that. And so that's why the policy incentive to reduce that tax burden for the inclusion of housing affordability, I think, is not only fair, but smart, because we can demonstrate when we are using this tool. So think about a raw piece of land in the community. Even at a higher tax rate, it's producing what it's producing. If a developer comes along and says, hey, I'm going to spend $50 million building this apartment community, and you want me to include 20% of it as affordable, and I want to use that tax incentive that you have to reduce my tax bill in our community, I'm here to tell you, in every instance I can think of, the community is receiving a much higher income from the property taxes paid, even when they're reduced, because it was raw land, which wasn't producing very much revenue for the community, in terms of tax receipts or the taxes being paid. Something's built. And yes, the tax bill, if it was all market rate and very expensive, would be higher. But if we reduce those taxes so we can have essential workers living in this apartment community, we're still receiving way more taxes than we were before, and we are achieving the public purpose of more affordable housing. So to me, that's a win-win for the community.
That's I really appreciate you painting that picture, because now I'm imagining the firefighter that you mentioned earlier, who is making $48,000 a year, who cannot afford a rental at market rate in Greenville County. And through what you just described now, they are receiving a lower rental rate because the tax on the developer and operator of that apartment is lower.
Is reduced.
And and thus, in a way, that firefighter isn't paying a 6% tax rate where a homeowner is paying a 4%. It's making it more attainable.
My hope is, as we learn more about housing and how we all can live in vibrant communities where, hey, my HVAC guy lives around the corner and the CEO of the bank lives 2 blocks away. America is a very economically stratified place, and we didn't used to be that way. We all lived together, and to me, that's a healthy way to live. And we live in an economy and in a community that's driven by tourism. And think about all the workers who support our tourism economy. We don't want them living an hour away from where they work in a hotel or a restaurant or a venue that we all take for granted. We want those folks to live close to where they work and where they're supporting us. I mean, I think every time I go to the grocery store and I see the people who work there, sometimes I wonder where that person lives and how far away from this store they live. And my hope is it's not very far.
Right, because that commute itself is an hour of someone's potentially minimum wage time that they're not getting paid for.
And it's a cost to all of us in terms of infrastructure. So ultimately, we all benefit from a more integrated environment where we all live closer together in a community that, when I say diverse, I mean diverse people who do different things for a living. Our school teachers and our grocery store workers, our restaurant workers, our hotel workers, and et cetera. That's the kind of community I think we all should aspire to live in. And that's the pressure we're under as a community, where if you want something more affordable, you have to kind of start driving outside of the urban core of Greenville to get to more natural affordability. And the other thing we should care about, I mean, we mentioned infrastructure, roads, but green space. And I'm here to tell you that we are better off as a community if we are focusing our housing development efforts in the middle third of this county where the infrastructure exists, so we can keep the special green character of the northern part of the county and then the rural, farm character of the southern part of the county, and really focus our density and our housing infrastructure on the middle third where all of the water and sewer lines are.
I know when people hear the word density, they kind of tense up the same way that they may be like, I'm all for affordable housing, but maybe not just down the block from where I live. I think with density, it's not high rises. It's not these massive complexes that take up away from the skyline and everything. I think density is a wide range. We have to think of housing as a continuum and a variety as well. And so density looks in a wide variety of ways, from duplexes and triplexes to quadplexes to townhomes. And that's where going back to smart policies and zoning and stuff to encourage for that development in that middle third of where we are in the county, so that we can have some more of that infill development in neighborhoods that already exist, where we can build housing that fits the character of the neighborhood, where you could drive by it and you almost have to do a double take of like, oh, is that a duplex right next to a few single family housing? That's really nice. And or you just drive by it and you don't even realize it. And so I think we need that wide variety. And when our codes and our policies support that, that's going to help speed along the process for that development, and to continue to also, because I think a lot of times people either view it as fully single family housing with your half acre lot or multifamily development. And we got to realize that there's a bunch in between in the middle that people are wanting to build and are trying to build. And that's been part of our fabric of the America as well from the beginning of time, the different types of mixed use developments. And we need to be bringing that back and being more intentional around that as well.
Thank you for drawing that picture in people's minds, because I do think people notice large multifamily apartments being built, and that's what density equals to them. But like you say, there's so much other density that people don't notice, which is precisely the point. And if you haven't thought about this much, I would really call your attention to the North Main area behind the Greenville Main Library. There are several duplexes, garage apartments that folks might not notice. The neighborhood of Swansgate near Greenville Memorial Hospital is a dense neighborhood of duplexes. There's places in Pebble Creek. They are scattered all over. Downtown Greer has density in a way that is not a large apartment building, which has its place too. So there's a lot of ways we can do it in Greenville County and have. Well, what are some things currently in the works that listeners might be interested in to address all of this and more?
The city of Greenville is a great partner of ours at the Greenville Housing Fund. And as an example, we've been talking about the county incentive policy. The city has recently adopted a housing impact analysis that allows them to now use part of the accommodations tax to support workforce housing. I think that's a big deal in our community, and it ties what we were just talking about related to the service economy and the tourism economy with a tax source to help support housing for that sector of our economy. That's one thing. Another thing is we live in a community that I believe, and I witness it every day, has so much care and compassion for those in the greatest need or those who are most vulnerable in our community. We have a new community initiative to address the needs of our unsheltered population, which some people refer to as homeless. And these are folks who are unhoused or unsheltered. And I am gratified that the community is coming together in a way to address the challenge we have with our unsheltered population, because in our community, I believe this is completely solvable. It's a solvable challenge where we can really connect and engage with folks who are unsheltered and get them into shelter and into housing and provide the necessary support to keep those folks safe, healthy, and value them as members of our community.
To that point of just that initiative coming together, I think that just really shows how a lot of work has been done over the years to collaborate amongst the nonprofit sector. Like, we're so grateful for you all at Greater Good Greenville. And part of our work at Greenville Housing Fund is we are the conveners of the Greenville Affordable Housing Coalition. And so that's bringing together all the partners who work in the affordable housing space, and it goes beyond just nonprofit developers, includes the private sector as well, government representation at all levels from our municipalities and county here in Greenville. And what's really great is we're all coming to the table together and addressing those housing needs, because the housing needs look differently and everyone has their area of expertise. If it is providing the shelter for those who are unhoused, or helping people just get into longer term stability through rental, affordable rental housing. And then hopefully, ideally, that if when they are ready one day, that they can access that market rate or affordable home ownership opportunities. So it's really great that we can all come together and share our concerns and opportunities and celebrate together, and really come around and find those areas where we can advocate around certain policies or resources. And so currently, a couple of things we're working on as a coalition is we are continuing those partnerships at the city and the county level, requesting that they continue to put funding towards affordable housing in their budgets, and then as well as working on a few other state partnerships and initiatives through one of our great state partners with the South Carolina Association for Community Economic Development. Like, they got legislation introduced to reauthorize the community development tax credit, which is a great public-private partnership opportunity where it's a tax credit for private individuals to receive a state tax credit when they make a donation or investment into a certified community development organization or community development financial institution. And so it's these vetted organizations that are receiving money that they can go out and do great community development work, and then they get the tax benefits for making that investment. And so we're really hopeful that that bill, which is H4164, will move along in the legislative process and pass and everything. And then we're also part of a wider network on helping with our eviction records of how do we clean up our eviction filings, because eviction records are a barrier for people to access housing as well. And we realize that, yes, there are natural consequences to evictions, and that needs to play out. We don't want to get rid of that, but there are some things we need to clean up of people's eviction records right now. If it's filed, it's on their record forever, and it never goes away. And when we look at the fact of our credit scores, like, that gets cleaned up every 7 years. And so why are we
Why
at
should an eviction be treated differently?
Yes, exactly. And so we are working to get legislation introduced there where we can have help clean up that process a little bit so people have more opportunity to access housing as well.
Well, what I hear you saying is that it is complex and that it is really important we get it right in this community because we care and we want a vibrant economy and vibrant neighborhoods. And I'm really grateful to the work that you both are doing through Greenville Housing Fund for making those things more possible. We appreciate all the work that you are doing, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.